broadcast on Comcast Channel 21 or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials web page. And thank you again for taking time out of your evening to join us. And with that, I will turn it over to the manager to introduce the first work session.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. We're here tonight to follow up on our moving ahead conversation from a couple of weeks ago. And I'm joined tonight by our staff team from Public Works Transportation, and of course, Andrew Martin from Lane Transit District as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Rob Interfeld to do a brief intro and turn it over to you guys to have your conversation.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. So as you recall, we were last here on February 28th in a joint work session with the LTD board, where we presented to you the recommended preferred alternative for moving ahead, so on which we've been working on for many years. And I'll just briefly review that. And I also just want to say that Terry Harding from the Planning Division, who's our third co-project manager for moving ahead, is here as well in case any land use questions come up. So just to review, the recommendation from the staff, the Oversight Committee, and the LTD Strategic Planning Committee is MX on River Road, enhanced corridor on Highway 99, Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, and Coburg Road, with additional design refinement and community engagement on Coburg Road, and no build on the route that would go on 30th to LCC. So we're here in case you have any questions for us. And other than that, we're going to let you deliberate, and that, with the goal of voting on a preferred alternative. Thank you.
Okay, that caught me by surprise. I was settling in for a presentation, but I understand that we've heard a lot about this, and we had a pretty robust work session just recently. So are there counselors who have other questions or need for clarification about this major endeavor? Emily, take it away.
Thank you. Just one thing that's been brought up a lot, especially today, is the ridership that, people see the big buses with only 2 or 3 people in them, and that's distressing. So, but what's the scoop on that?
Andrew, would you like to take that?
Sure, yeah. So I'll say people may see 2 or 3 people on a bus, and that's certainly true sometimes. It's definitely not true most of the time. It might seem that way. The buses are large, and a lot of people actually get on and off. So there's quite a bit of activity. You might see it with a couple people on, but they might get off the next stop, and 2 or 3 more people might get on and ride 1 or 2 stops. LTD is, our ridership is down because of COVID for a lot of, I think, really obvious reasons. But it's recovering. Just last week, actually, we went up another 1,000 boardings a day on average. And really, I think we're building for the future, not necessarily what we have exactly today. In 2019, our ridership was doing really well. And in particular, our MX system continued to add ridership every year, while some other routes were still declining. So I'm not sure if that quite answers the question. Do you have a more specific question about the moving ahead ridership?
That answers it. That's kind of what I thought. Is this is a far-reaching plan, and it's not going to apply to just what's happening today. And oh my gosh, let's hope we're not in the middle of a pandemic, and that people, not maybe to the way they were before, but will come to offices and schools and need the transportation. I also want to mention to people that this is a plan. It's not an approved, done deal. It's a way to prioritize and look for money and work on plans, and there will be input. But we need a priority list, so we're not just working at everything sort of without paying attention to what's what. And I just want people to know that we're not signing off on final plans, but we're making a priority. Thank you.
Thank you. I had Jennifer first and then Claire.
Sorry, I accidentally hit my button off. So Zoom error. So yes, so I wanted to comment on Emily's question first. As you know, I ride the bus. There's about 3 routes that I ride mainly. There are hardly ever 2 people. There's usually multiple. Actually, one of the routes I ride, there are times I don't get to sit down because there are too many riders at that particular time. So I know the buses are getting used, at least the ones that I use. And I think Andrew's point that it's hard to tell who's in there with the things that are covering the windows and folks slouching down. There are people riding in. And at the end of the day, if there are 2 people on that bus, those are 2 people that couldn't have gotten where they needed to go if that bus didn't exist, probably. A lot of bus riders don't have other options. And they're using public transportation to get to jobs or to the doctor or pick their kids up from daycare or go shopping. So it's all really important. But also, I just wanted to take the time to thank staff for all the engagement and listening to folks. I prefer to ride on an MX, so I like to see them on our major corridors, but I also understand that there's a lot of restrictions on Coburg Road, and so I really appreciate you taking that feedback into consideration when you made your final recommendations. And I think they're good. I think we're in a good place, and I plan on.
Hey, thank you, Claire, and then Matt.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I was curious if we know whether Councilors Evans and Clark will be joining us. Are we expecting them?
I haven't heard that they aren't coming.
Okay.
Same.
Okay. I'd love their participation in this discussion and vote, but obviously sometimes things happen for us and we can't get to meetings when we expect to. I know that's happened to me. So I don't have any questions. I just wanted to address a few things. First, I just want to say I'm actually very excited that we're in this place. We're at this point. It's been several years that we've been working on this, and I'm very supportive of the alternatives that are presented to us. I think they are the right fit for the right corridors. And as Emily said, helping us prioritize how we're going to prioritize what goes where. And then as staff told us at our last work session, a lot of refinement happens as we get down to this patch of, these driveways that lead into these businesses or this piece of right of way, everything gets a lot of scrutiny, and the ability for property owners impacted by any one of these particular alternatives have the opportunity to engage with staff and help make adjustments that are gonna prove, in many cases, better for the project, better for their property, and an overall win for the community. I did want to address some input I got from constituents that I haven't been able to respond to yet. One objected to the idea that the MX was just meant to bring people downtown and they didn't have any reason to go downtown, and why were we going to build MX for that? The MX on the River Road corridor is for much, much more than bringing folks downtown. That is one of its purposes, but it's for people to ride up and down the River Road corridor. And whether they're residents or they want to visit the commercial retailers there, whatever it is that they need to do. It will bring people downtown where they can enjoy downtown or connect with another line of the MX. Go to Springfield, for example. Go down to Target or Walmart and connect with another bus line to go elsewhere in the city. And I also had some folks write to us saying that I had said that I hadn't heard from anyone in opposition from my ward. That is not what I had said at our prior work session. I had said very clearly that I was not aware of any property owner or business owner along River Road who had reached out to me individually in opposition. And I stand by that statement. And I just want to say on the ridership thing, I saw an empty bus go by me, so therefore no one must be riding the bus. That's like me saying I never hit traffic on the Beltline, and so therefore everyone's complaints about congestion must just be griping and not real. It's an invalid way to judge whether our transit system is operating in the way that it needs to be for the needs of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and then Randy.
Thank you, Mayor. And on that final note that Councilor Syrett just made, if I could pick up what she's putting down, we also aren't necessarily taking action for the moment right now. We're in the midst of a global pandemic. If council acts in the way that I suspect they will, because I am supportive of this concept, this is an investment in the future of Eugene, as much, if not far more, than it is an action that affects us that affects us today, tomorrow, or even in the near future. This is a long-term investment that will have huge payoffs as we transition off of fossil fuels and embrace the connectivity that MX and alternative transportation provides around town. Mayor, I did have a question that this comes not from a constituent of mine, but a concerned neighbor on Coburg Road. So presumably either Councilor Ye or Councilor Clark's constituent. But the author of this email had concerns about moving ahead because they say, quote, "From a selfish point of view, my property on Coburg Road has big, beautiful trees that would have to be removed, and the station, the LTD station, presumably, the station would pretty much be at my front door. My property value would be devastated for no good reason. This is a bad idea. I hope you'll vote accordingly," they say. Well, I would submit that their property value might be bolstered if they have such easy access within walking distance to the station. But I do recognize that there's a concern in regards to the tree canopy. Can either Rob or Andrew or Terry address the effort to, if there are any trees removed, what the plan looks like to replace said trees? Our tree canopy is dismal compared to what it should be. And I'd love to hear if there are any creative thoughts or anything anything I might have missed in the proposal that addresses tree planting or replanting of any of our trees that are removed for this project.
Sure, I can take that. We have a whole couple 100-page report on trees, actually, because we're concerned about them too. And the short answer is any trees that are impacted, like removed, severely damaged, they will be replaced with at least one new tree. That's not as good as a big old tree today, but someday it will be. And we kind of are really, part of the design refinement process is to get very specific about specific trees and trying to not impact them. Where possible, we will design around them. I don't believe that that's going to be possible. There will be trees impacted, but we're doing everything we can to minimize those impacts. And it's not just, cutting it down. They could be impacted when we dig up the roadway and the root systems. So we're aware of all of those issues, and we will be doing everything we can to not impact trees. Where they are impacted, at least one new tree will be planted for every tree that is removed.
That's helpful to know. Thank you. And I'd be interested in absorbing and reading the 100-page report.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you, Mayor. My colleagues already spoke to one of my main issues about this is building for the future. And, if we continue looking at our transit corridors for housing, which I certainly am in support of, it's going to become more important. I also am concerned about the tree canopy, and I appreciate what you shared with that. I'll also be looking for how we're going to address that with our House Bill 2001 and middle housing discussions as well. I think that needs to be a focus of everything we do in the way of development. I also wanted to speak briefly about how I'm looking at this. Generally, when I look at these issues, especially where there's some divisions in our community, I try to look for where the middle ground is. I actually think this plan achieves that. And I appreciate the thought that's gone into it. It didn't go as far as it could have, But I think it's going to, at least for a general direction for now, meets the needs that we need to be looking at. So I do appreciate the work staff has done on this. We do need to be looking for alternative transportation, especially as we densify. I know that change is not easy for people. I struggle with it too. But you know, at the same time, it's time to be looking, I think, forward on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Claire, another round?
Yeah, just on the question of the trees. One, I'm not sure why that particular property owner is assuming that a bus stop would be put adjacent to their property. As we've been saying, there's still a lot of decisions to be made, and that may not be the case. But I just wanted to remind folks that when the West 11th MX was put in place, some trees did have to be taken out, and the project was able to secure funding and plant twice as many trees as were removed. And I believe in that case, we're able to plant them with our updated knowledge of which trees are best and how to plant them in a better fashion so they're more likely to survive and thrive. So we've learned a lot about tree planting from our city arborists have over the last several years. So, I mean, that was a case of, you know, as Andrew recognized, taking down a mature tree and replacing it with a young one is not a one-to-one swap, but being able to realize more trees along a route is a possibility as well.
Okay, thank you. I know that Councilor Evans is trying to get on, and maybe, and there's Councilor Clark. That's great. I just, while we wait, hopefully giving Greg a chance to queue up before we move on this, I did want to say one other thing, which is supporting, first of all, sharing certainly Claire's excitement, and I think many of you are excited about actually being at this stage in this longstanding process, and recognizing that, you know, even though this has taken a very long time, that our timing is actually very good right now. The Biden administration has passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. There are more federal funds coming. This kind of work requires federal funds, and DeFazio has another year as chair of the House Transportation Committee. So we are in a good position to be able to apply for the kinds of funds that we need, and most often with those federal grants, you have to have an approved policy in place, and so the timing is very exciting for us to actually be able to make some progress and come back and have those more specific conversations with the community and the people who live and work along those corridors. So I'm very, very excited about the work and appreciate all the work that has brought us to this time. And I think with that, if there are no other comments, we're probably ready to put some motions on the table. So I'll turn to you, Claire.
Yep. I move to approve the resolution attached to the AIS as attachment A, entitled Approval of Moving Ahead Locally Preferred Alternatives.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hand.
Mayor,
yes.
if Councilor Evans is trying to get on, I'm sure he'd appreciate us waiting for him to vote on this motion, since he's worked on it probably longer than all of us.
Probably has. All right. I was trying to, yes, you're right. Well, I see two more counselors with comments, so we'll turn first to Mike and then possibly to Matt. Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Mayor, and my apologies to everyone. I was detained by work that took me longer than I thought it would tonight, so I apologize for that. As a result, I did not hear the opening part, but I think I remember from reading with the materials that, maybe I'll just ask Rob, could you remind me of the portion for Coburg Road here, the recommendation for Coburg Road and what that entails?
Sure, it's enhanced corridor with design refinement or additional design refinement and community engagement. Especially, it doesn't, you know, what we talked about at the last work session was that the design refinement in particular would focus on the section from Oakway road to the Perry Street Bridge.
Thank you, sir. There's a great deal of this that I support, but there's portions of it that I struggle with. And I know a number of constituents of mine who are absolutely outraged by. And so it's a tough vote, frankly. I'd like to separate each of the things, but I don't think my colleagues would stand for that. So I kind of have to just decide up or down based on the totality of good work that can be done here versus the harm it will do, from my perspective. A tough vote. If everybody's interested in separating each of these legs, let me know, because there are ones I'd vote for, but there are ones I really won't. So thank you for consideration. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. We do have the motions on the table. I do really regret not having Greg at the table, but I think we need to go ahead. So, Emily, take it away.
Could we just postpone our vote until after the next subject? Still during the meeting?
We don't know if he's going to get on, do we?
Sorry.
Like trying.
Yes, you know what? I will give him an opportunity when he emerges in the next meeting to actually state his support for it, even if he misses the vote. So I'll give him the stage for that. Okay. All right. All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 opposed. 1, and it passes 6-1. Thank you very, very much. I really think it's excellent work, and I'm very excited to be at the next place. So with that, we are ready for the next item of business, and I will turn that over to the city manager to introduce.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next work session is really a conversation about the right-of-way and how that is used, or actually curb line to curb line. So Matt Rodriguez is going to lead us, our Public Works Director, in that conversation.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Matt Rodriguez, the Public Works Director, and I'm here with Lieutenant Doug Mozan of the Eugene Police Department and Jeff Petrie, Director of Administration and Parking Manager for the Planning and Development Department. And we're here to discuss potential changes to City Code to address violations of Eugene Code 4.830. That's the portions of streets reserved for vehicular traffic, but put more simply, the portions of streets between the curb line. So it's violations that would impose an immediate safety hazard. That's what we're here to talk about. Increasingly, staff have received requests for service from the public concerning unauthorized uses of space within the curb line of city streets, including storage of materials, staging of construction activities, or placement of tents or other non-vehicular shelters. Currently, Eugene Code 4.990 penalties sets the maximum penalty for unauthorized use of these portions of streets as a $250 fine. When unauthorized uses of these portions of streets poses an immediate safety hazard, the Eugene Police Department has found that a $250 fine has not been an effective penalty to compel some persons to immediately address the safety hazard. To more effectively address safety hazards associated with the unauthorized use of these areas within curb lines of streets, staff suggest a code amendment that would add an enhanced penalty to Eugene Code 4.990 for a willful violation of Eugene Code 4.830. The code amendment would define a willful violation as a violation not remedied after an individual has been informed that the violation poses an immediate safety hazard. A willful violation could be punished by a $500 fine or up to 10 days in jail or both. While staff anticipate using the willful violation tool sparingly, in those circumstances where an unauthorized use of the portion of streets within the curb lines poses an immediate safety hazard, we believe that the ability to arrest someone that refuses to remedy the safety hazard is needed to effectively manage city streets. There are 2 potential motions provided if City Council chooses to take action tonight to move this consideration forward. The first, which is recommended by the City Manager, is to direct the City Manager to set a public hearing to consider an ordinance amending Eugene Code 4.990 penalties to add the penalty of a $500 fine or up to 10 days in jail or both for a willful violation of Eugene Code 4.830. Alternatively, the second motion is to direct the city manager to prepare an ordinance amending Eugene Code 4.990 for city council consideration at another work session. Of course, council can choose to take no action or direct the city manager to take another action for this topic. And with that, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you very much. Alan and then Randy.
Thank you, Mayor. I understand the low fine amount, and I understand the proposal. Can you give us, Matt, some examples of, without going into specifics of particular individuals, what kind of real problems are we talking about where this has become a safety issue, or people haven't followed the rules? And can you give us some examples?
I'll give a couple examples, and then Lieutenant Mozan or Jeff can probably jump in as well. So really, I kind of mentioned three things. I think it's across the gamut of at least those, but what we're really starting to see nowadays is use of the streets for things that I don't think were really contemplated in the past. Literally, like things like storing materials. We're seeing people just pile stuff in the street. And when it's not related to a vehicle, our code really has not been set up in a way to effectively address that. Jeff's team that does parking management, they've got their process and the way they address an unauthorized use. But if it's something like that, a fine may not be compelling. Use of the right-of-way for construction, we do have right-of-way use permits that we issue. But if someone chose to place a construction fence within a street line, it could end up being cheaper than the daily fine amount than the rental of that use of space. So it's something that we want to be able to compel in a different way. And then lastly, we have seen a number of instances where people have built a shelter or set up a tent in portions of the street where it's likely a danger to them to be there. And it could also be a danger to people using the street to travel, that may not be expecting that type of use. So that's kind of the range of issues that we're seeing.
So I can add to what Matt said and say that in addition to storage of material, and we've seen things like steel I-beams that have been placed in the roadway. We've seen also in areas where there are humans, we've seen a lot of things like bike frames and other material that could be hazardous, not only to vehicles that are passing by, but present a roadway hazard to the person that's situated near them.
Yeah, I know that there's been some issues in construction sites in Ward 3 where folks have doing construction projects, building new homes and whatnot, use the right of way. But there's a way to do that legally, right? Where you can put in ask for a permit to be able to use it on a temporary basis.
That is correct. Yeah, we were able to issue right-of-way use permits when, for instance, often when buildings are constructed and they need some portion of the right-of-way for staging or for safety, depending on the overhead work that's being accomplished.
Right, and in doing that, there's safety precautions that are required to, like cones and things like that.
Yeah, they're required to have a traffic control plan to address any safety issues that could occur on the street as part of that permit.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Keating asks by chat, how many times a year these $250 citations are issued, and how many repeat offender annually EPD encounters?
Lieutenant Mozan, I don't mean to interrupt. My apologies. I want to wait for my time in the queue if that's possible.
I apologize.
No worries. My apologies.
Yeah, we don't take questions from the chat.
Check.
The mayor calls.
That's okay. All right, Randy and then Matt.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks to both of you for bringing this forward. I was hoping to see even more, but as far as where are some examples of streets that have problems like this going on, I can give you examples in West Eugene. Just out over the weekend, and there's vehicles that are parked associated with one of the spur streets off of Edcombe Boulevard, dark vehicles that are parked clear out into the travel lane. I mean, they're perpendicular to the street. They're pulling in, blocking the bike lane and out into the street. And if you come along there at night, you could easily hit them. And there's trucking coming in and out day and night to support the businesses in there. So it is dangerous. I can show you where there are structures that are built out into the streets. That's been down on West 10th, east of Tie-In Street. They've been built on Tie-In Street. I mean, basically all over West Eugene. And it's just begging for somebody to get hurt or killed. So I applaud you doing this just from a safety standpoint. And also as an effort to try and gain more control of our streets. I also think we still need something moved into the parking code that addresses chronic serial violators. We have people that just move from one space to another space to another space, and the clock keeps starting over again. And it's hard to gain control of our community when that's going on. So anyway, I'm hoping we'll have more of this. And then the last thing I wanted to point out, if I remember correctly, are parking ordinance amendments that we made through administrative order through the city manager had a 1-year sunset that I believe is coming up before too long. And so I'm hoping that's going to come back to us so that we don't miss that opportunity to have a discussion about what it's accomplished, what still needs to be done, and whether or not we renew it. I think it's incredibly important to some of the success that we have had in West Eugene in gaining control of our streets. But again, I think there's more work that needs to be done on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt and then Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'll just dive right into the question that I sent Lieutenant Mosan. Thank you for your enthusiasm, Lieutenant. I'm curious how many times per year the $250 citations are used, and how many repeat offenders annually EPD encounters.
Yeah, that's a good question. This is not yet an ordinance, so this is something we're trying to create. And what we know is that where we have camping ordinance in public rights of way, we were on a moratorium for a while. So that's it's a question that I can't quite answer accurately since we've not been able to enforce this particular issue for quite a while. When we had enforced it, it was something that we encountered a bit on 13th near Chambers, between Tyler and Chambers. We did have a repeat offender over there who was cited repeatedly, and then eventually we had to deal with a different section of law to mitigate the problem. Was disorderly conduct.
Okay, thank you. If I could submit, I do think that as a community, that often we embrace the education piece, which I'm all for, but a letter will be sent out about blocking the sidewalk, or a letter will be sent out about boat storage, or a letter will be sent out about tree canopy or tree removal. Oftentimes it's a letter without any code enforcement. So from that perspective, I'm interested in actually enforcing the law. And want to give you the tools to do so. But I have some reservations about the binary, and I guess it's not a binary because it could be both, but either the $500 fine or up to 10 days in jail. I would be very interested in whether it comes from conversations with stakeholders that serve on the police commission, and hearing from you and the chief, about the deterrent that could be woven in there, a third deterrent that could be 150 days of community service. And I ask that that hopefully it gets colleagues thinking that maybe the second option B is the direction to head in, and exploring a third penalty that doesn't break the bank of those who already have no bank, and doesn't criminalize their existence. I'm all for reining in the repeat offenders, but if there's a third option that is beneficial to A, curbing the behavior, and B, ultimately the community, and C, keeping folks out of that jail system, I would love to have another work session to explore what it looks like to have a community service aspect woven into this ordinance. Lieutenant, is there are you prepared, or is there anyone prepared to speak to that approach?
Councillor Keating, I can't speak specifically to that approach, but I did want to correct one thing. So the existing city code does have a $250 fine that can be used now. So the fine does exist. And I think, as Lieutenant Mozan talked about in my conversations with him and other members of EPD, the issue of a fine is often that there are some people that cannot pay a fine, right? And to continue to place fines on them they cannot pay is not an effective way to compel them to move, and you're burdening someone with fines. The intention of adding the willful violation of this is really not to arrest anyone, but it's to have that ability to compel someone to move with that. So that I just wanted to clarify that one piece in the conversation.
Okay, that's helpful. I still think it would be worth exploring alternatives to jail that would still get at the root of what we're talking about here. I really appreciate the clarification about the existing code, Matt, and I appreciate the perspective that the code isn't necessarily aiming to put folks in jail, but it does. That's one of the two options. So I just ask for colleagues for an empathetic approach that allows us to take our time and look at what possibly that third option might be. I would long for 150 days of community service, and I hope we have a work session to explore it. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. I saw the city attorney's hand up earlier. Did you have a clarification you wanted to offer?
No, thank you. Matt addressed the distinction between what's in current code. Thank you.
Okay, super. Thank you. Okay, Mike and then Claire.
Thank you, Mayor. Some subjects are harder for me to use restrained language than others. First thing I want to say is I agree absolutely with everything that Councillor Groves said. I couldn't possibly agree more. I want to admire out loud Matt for his restrained use of language in this. In my opinion, it's past time. It's well past time that we enable people to be a danger to others. And that's what's happening. Our police lieutenants just made it very, very clear. There is imminent, immediate, present danger to people all the time that we have no code provision to address, because fines don't work. And I would suggest that very few people will actually be put in jail, as opposed to the officer having the ability to say, you need to move this now, or I have to take you to jail as an option, or I'm going to do that. That is a compelling reason for the person causing danger to others to act, more so than a fine they don't have any intention to pay. We have a two-tiered system of laws almost in this community, and we hear it all the time. If somebody who owns a business along a particular roadway wants to do something to expand or build or make their business better or their property better for some reason, and it encroaches on the roadway, they have to jump through a million hoops, and we force them. But somebody that wants to create an imminent danger to others on our streets, we look the other way, and it's wrong. So I'm in absolute support of this, and I appreciate our staff folks who brought it forward. And it's just high time we do this. And I agree with Randy. I would be in favor of adding several more things that would give our folks who do the enforcement work more options to be effective. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, and then Jennifer.
Thank you, Mayor. I have some questions and then some comments. So who is making the determination that something presents an immediate safety hazard? Would it be a police officer who's been called to, look into it, or Public Works? How is that?
It would be the discretion of the police officer.
And would Public Works folks also have that discretion?
So Public Works doesn't have the ability to arrest anyone.
No, I understand that.
It would have to be there.
Could they be telling the police officer this is a hazard?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Sorry, Councilor Surratt. Yes, we would be helping to identify safety hazards. The willful violation, though, would of course happen after a police officer talked to someone, told them it was an immediate safety hazard, and then they did not act to correct it.
And does this include space in the right-of-way that's meant for parking vehicles?
That's correct. So it's within the curb lines.
So when we use the language in this AIS street between the curbs reserved for vehicular traffic, we are also talking about spaces that no one actually travels through, they park in.
Yes, it is the areas of the street within the curb line.
Okay. Do you know, and no one might know this right off the top of their head, but I'm wondering if this would be a violation that would be eligible for community court should it occur within the geographical boundaries that the court oversees. Does anyone know?
I don't know, but it certainly could be, because there's two things that are happening with community court. They're looking at not having the boundary just limited to downtown, and they're also looking at the various offenses that could get somebody in there. So if this change were made, it certainly could be affirmatively addressed and looked at.
Yeah. So I do really appreciate Matt, our Public Works Director, explaining that the idea here is to have additional leverage to try to get people to comply. That makes sense. But, if we were to pass this, or even having this conversation, we're going to be accused of arresting people for being homeless, which I know technically would not be the case, but that technicality would not matter to those who would view that as an injustice. And I'll say for my neighborhood, just as this AIS was being delivered, I noticed a bed frame with some items stored in it on Fifth Avenue in a parking space. It's been there for about 4 days now. Clearly would qualify for this amendment. And it's absolutely a problem in my ward. Of people building shelters in the right of way. Some of them are chronic offenders. And, just recently, Matt and our assistant city manager and chief of police came to a Whitaker Community Council meeting to talk about how are we going to deal with enforcement now that Washington Jefferson is being closed down. However, I have to be very honest, I don't know if this would be the solution that they would support. So I would like another work session, because I think we need some time to speak with folks and find that out and validate if this is an approach that can be supported, at least by constituents of mine who I hear from regularly. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Mayor. So I actually agree with Claire that I would rather go with option B of having a work session. I think for slightly different reasons, though. I understand this is a big problem. We've had plenty of evidence to support it, but if it, or maybe is it better to start with a question? Maybe Doug, maybe Lieutenant Mouzan can answer this. would you say the majority of these fines or these incidents you were having pre-COVID were unhoused individuals or those contractors? I mean, it sounds like there's two populations that this is targeting.
Well, that's a good question. There are three categories that I've seen. I have seen personally construction contractors that have placed items in the roadway because it was expedient to them. I've also seen folks who are who have erected structures or created storage in the street of items, regardless of whether they were staying in there or they were staying adjacent to there. And the third thing I've seen, which is unique, is where a business has intentionally placed items that presented a public hazard so that people would not camp in front of their business as in sort of an opportunity cost hazard. And that happened quite a bit down in Councillor Grove's ward with things like steel I-beams and logs and concrete pieces and other creative things that folks with forklifts were able to place in the roadway.
Okay. Well, my concern is what other folks have mentioned, that if you can't afford a $250 fine, you can't afford a $500 fine. So I'm not sure that's an actual deterrent for the choices that you're making. And you said you don't actually plan to take anyone to jail. And my understanding of our jail bed access right now is I don't know how likely it is that someone would actually stay in jail if that's the intention of this ordinance, is to punish someone by keeping them in jail. So I would really be interested to hear I mean, it sounds like Councillor Grove has some other ideas, and I would really like to hear those, because I'm not sure how effective these two things are going to be in actually solving the problem, except for, I mean, obviously business owners would be concerned about a fine. I don't know. Anyways, I'm still thinking there's a lot of things going on, but I would prefer to have another work session so we can think about maybe some other alternatives.
Can I speak to the leverage piece?
Go ahead. Yes, please.
You know, the idea is not so much to arrest somebody as it is to have a lever, an actual ability to move the stuff or the person out of the roadway and mitigate the problem. So if my only recourse is writing a ticket, I don't actually have the recourse to move the stuff. And so when something is arrestable, the stuff itself becomes evidence, or it becomes a hazard that can be mitigated with a tow or storage, whatever that is. It gives us the willful violation, which means we've already given somebody a warning, and then we've subsequently given them a citation, probably. And then they continue to violate, gives us the ability to take things to just one more level, regardless of whether it'll have a real enduring effect, if that makes sense. It allows us to mitigate our hazard.
Are you saying that the ability to arrest the person also gives you the ability to move the dangerous item? Yes. You couldn't do that other way. The way it is now, you couldn't do that. You couldn't move the item.
That's correct.
Okay, I did not understand that. That is very helpful information. Yeah.
And now without closing the roadway to everyone, for instance.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense now. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Emily.
Thank you. I see this in my ward. I don't think as much as Claire does, but it's really dangerous. I really worry about people getting run over by vehicles. And I understand now that the arrest threat means you can move the dangerous items, but I also agree with Matt that jail or a fine isn't going to be effective if we're not going to stay in jail. And I don't really want to support people in jail for things like this, or you can't pay the fine. But, you know, I bet business people wouldn't like community service. You know, you put them on road crew. Nobody really likes that. I'm not sure what 6 months of community service means. Do you mean, you know, once or twice a month? Because 6 months for some stuff in the road or a $500 fine is wacky to me. But I was ready to say this was a good idea, but if we need another work session to add an alternative punishment, I'd be into that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, second rounds, I've got Alan and then Mike and then Randy.
Mayor, my question got asked.
Okay, well then, Mike, you're up.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate my colleagues' point of view and that of their constituents, and it's their job to represent them just like it's mine. I can think very easily of a dozen of my constituents who could not listen to this conversation calmly. I'd be willing to bet Randy can do the same. One of the frustrating pieces was Claire's comment. I don't mean any disrespect to Claire at all. And I watched that Whitaker council meeting, as a matter of fact, the other day, that we wouldn't want people to disagree or have offense, or they might have concerns or be upset at us doing this. The level of upset that my constituents have been for the length of time they have been upset has been completely ignored by the council and the city for way too long. And I don't speak for him, but I'd be willing to bet, because I've seen the emails that Randy gets, on the number of people who are so frustrated because we won't give the police officers the tools they need to do the job of stopping behavior that is dangerous to others. So I'm hopeful we don't process this to death, but that we consider the question and support the idea of the officers dealing with this rather than citizens against citizens dealing with this, which is I'm afraid we're getting close to that. So I hope we allow the officers the tools to deal effectively with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy and then Claire.
Thank you, Mayor. The first point I was going to emphasize was emphasized by Lieutenant Mozan, that it gives us the teeth, it gives staff the teeth to actually move things and not have to wait 72 hours, but to just move it, impound it, whatever they have to do. This is a very real issue in my ward. I hear about it every day, 7 days a week. I dealt with it both days again this weekend on my weekend. And I'm happy to do that because I know how frustrated people are. We've had businesses that are leaving. I've had neighbors that are up to here with it. And it's just, we need to have order. It's not about not trying to help people who are down on their luck. In fact, a lot of the people that have been moving into my ward lately are from West 13th Camp and Washington Jefferson Park. And they're people who had offered a place to go and declined. And so, what do we do about that? At some point, like I said, we've just got to restore order. And yeah, we can postpone this for another work session, but the problem isn't getting any better for the people that I represent. And I'd like to think I represent all the community. Not too long ago, I made a point of, when we were doing redistrict discussions, of talking about trying to break up the West Eugene commercial industrial areas so that we'd have more counselors giving representation. And I heard from several of my colleagues, well, we're all concerned about all of Eugene. Well, let's show it. Let's help with this. This is something that's been a problem ongoing since before I took office, and it's still going on today, and it's gotten worse. And it's getting more dangerous out there. People's behavior has gotten worse. There was a report today of a car from one of the camps pulling into a parking lot of a business, and they asked these people to leave, and they threatened them and just left their car and went on about their business. This stuff has to stop, but it's all these different levels. This is one level, though, I was hoping we could all agree on, because it's something that endangers even the people that are in the space. And the things that are being put into these spaces that just somebody driving down the street could run into. So I guess I've made my point, but it's really frustrating for people out in West Eugene. They want help. They need help.
Claire and then Matt, and then I realize the city manager has something to say. So
yeah, I'm sorry my colleagues feel that the way I choose to represent my constituents is bumping up against and causing people to feel ignored. I'll just say I'm not afraid to cause offense. I just voted on moving ahead alternatives in spite of, you know, having some pretty hardcore emails come my way in opposition. That's not why I mentioned the issue of people saying you're arresting people for being homeless. I mentioned that just to remind us that that's going to be the narrative if we take this action. You know, I'm not completely against this idea, but I do feel that you know, my constituents who have asked, unlike some of the constituents that Councilor Groves and Councilor Clark referenced, my constituents have not necessarily said, please help us and put these people in jail, unless those people were dealing drugs or operating a chop shop. But if they were simply camped out, that isn't necessarily the response that they have asked of me. And as far as your comments, Councilor Groves, yes, I think we all have a responsibility to think about the entire city, but your voters didn't elect me. Ward 7 voters elected me. And so they are the folks that I have to give an especially more deep analysis to as I think about these choices that we're making. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not going to end up, you know, supporting what you would like to see happen, but I am not clear right now if that is what the voters who elected me want to see.
okay, I've got Matt, and then I'm sorry, Greg hasn't had a first round. Let me let Greg have a first round.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm sorry we had technical difficulties. I couldn't get in earlier in the first part of the meeting. You know, I get the same complaints and the same communications that Councilor Groves gets. His ward abuts mine. We have similar issues in terms of where people are camping out, how aggressive some people are towards people who are just trying to go to work and not bother anybody. I think that we need to deal with the issues, and we've talked about this for years, that people who do commit crimes and are trying to intimidate folks and do other things of that nature need to be dealt with in a way that is appropriate to the actions that they're taking. It's not okay for people to, you know, go up to women, to men, to other people who are just trying to go to work and threaten them and say things to them that are wholly inappropriate and make them fear going to their jobs, or, you know, same thing. And what we have here is one of those chicken and egg situations where, you know, we don't have the resources to deal with the issues that we have on the street. And we don't have the resources to deal with the poverty that is generating those issues. And so those issues quite often are turning into crimes. And we don't have the resources to go and just lock people up for some of the crimes that they commit. We don't have the jail beds. We don't have the spaces. We're between rocks and hard places, and we don't have the budget. So we have to work together more with our county and state partners on solutions to the homeless situation. And we need to be very clear about, if you're going to commit a crime, you're going to be held accountable for committing that crime. If that means that someone is locked up, then they get locked up. Or if that means that someone has to pay a fine, then they have to pay a fine. And if they don't have the money to do that, then we need to look for creative ways in order for those folks to be able to pay the debt off to society that they've created by doing those kinds of actions, or get them the mental help or, substance abuse help that they need, that we're wholly understaffed for on the county side, and it's not our responsibility on the city side. And I'm really concerned that as we get deeper and deeper into this conversation and deeper into talking about how we solve this, is that we're getting closer and closer to inching into becoming a social service agency instead of a municipality that deals with the issues that municipalities are supposed to deal with.
Thank you. Matt.
Thank you, Mayor. My colleague and friend north of Valley River Center said that he's concerned that we are, quote, working process to death. My longing for our second option does not tie the hands of, or is not process. I think it's paramount to find a third option. And I want to be very clear. That third option doesn't tie the hands of law enforcement. I don't recall mentioning any longing to remove a steep fine or remove jail time from the motion. There was a longing to add a third alternative that I find appropriate, and it would be inappropriate to do so on the fly in this work session without the thoughtful input of staff and stakeholders. If option B is advanced, I would hope that there would be an immense amount of urgency behind the motion that would signal to our city manager to bring that work session back to us at her earliest convenience. So I want to be very clear to my colleagues that I don't intend to tie law enforcement's hands by supporting option B. I intend to deliver, hopefully, a more thoughtful approach for folks who are unhoused and setting up camp right on Amazon, right across from the bus station, right in the right of way. It's a danger, but they're also constituents because they live here in South Eugene. And those constituents shouldn't face either jail time or a $500 fine. There should be a pathway or a deterrent that either law enforcement or the courts could find ways for them to not only get the help they need, but ways for them to recognize that you probably shouldn't be setting up camp in a right of way, and you're not going to be penalized so harshly that you're either never going to pay a fine or you're going to do jail time. That's why, Counselor, I don't want to call you out by name, Counselor Clark, so my apologies. That's why, however, I am longing for that option B. It does not undercut my my support of law enforcement's ability to do their job in our community.
Thank you. Yes,
Mayor,
yes.
I think I have a couple things I want to say, and I know Catherine wants to clarify what's already possible with community service. So I'm going to let her do that, and then we can come back.
Okay.
Just very quickly, Councillor Keating, and if you want to have more information provided by your presiding judge, Gil, he can do that. But community service is currently an option for judges now. It's not in your code. It doesn't need to be in your code, but he has a number of options, and so do the other judges, available to them. So including community service, we have people that pay their fines through various community services, and it is part of the system already. So and it's not in your code as an option. So I just want to make sure you don't have to add it for that to be an option for the judges.
Okay, Manager, did you also want to speak to?
Yeah. So before I wade into this, I want to remind you that at my December evaluation, you actually asked and invited me to join in these conversations at times when I had something that I felt strongly about. So in this case, I feel like you as a body have been asking us to bring back tools. What can we do to help? And we've been really pushing our staff to say, what can we do to actually make the situation better across Eugene for folks that are really struggling? And this is a tool that has come forward as like, this is actually something. And one of my concerns is if you get into that toolbox and you start looking tool by tool, there's going to be things in there that you like this, you don't like this, you want this, you don't want this. I mean, that would be a natural reaction. I think that would be true across all of our enforcement. And what's really powerful and valuable for us is to have a mix of all of those together so that staff can use them in individual cases and individual needs to really respond to situations. So I get a little bit concerned about a work session that's going to zero in even more on this topic without at least first having the public hearing. And that was kind of what we were recommending is, we could have this conversation, get a feel for it. We could have a public hearing. We can hear from your constituents. We can always come back after that with a work session to tweak it. But I don't know that we're going to have a lot more on this specific item in a work session. I just have to put out there that I'm a little bit concerned about that.
All right, thank you. That's very helpful. So I have, it looks like I have Claire and then Jennifer and then Alan and Mike.
So the city manager was channeling what I was thinking. We're about to go on break. So we're not going to have a public hearing on this for several weeks at the earliest, which for me, in the concerns that I raised about wanting to kind of validate with constituents gives me time to do that. I really appreciate the city attorney pointing out that our municipal court judge already has the discretion to assign community service in lieu of a fine or in lieu of jail time. So I'm at this point in support of moving this to a public hearing.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer.
Thanks. I just wanted to clarify in case it was not clear that after getting my questions answered, I am comfortable with option A as well. And I just wanted to point out that I'm not sure where the idea that we're not giving the police the tools that they asked for is coming from, because from my memory, when Chief Skinner has asked for more funding, we have multiple times given him more funding. We gave him the ability so that people could trespass for planting strips. We've done new parking rules so that people are not parking where they should not be and disrupting businesses. And if there are things that they have asked, that people have asked for, that staff has asked for, that we have not addressed, I am not aware of them, and I would very much like to be, because they need to be discussed. But I don't think they're out there. As Sarah said, it sounds like there are not that many options legal options for us. But here again, in front of, Lieutenant Mozan is here, and I'm sure Chief Skinner will hear, if there are things that the police want council to consider, they should let us know. And otherwise, we're doing everything we can to give them all of the tools that are available to us.
Thank you. Let's see, Emily, I'm going to let you go next because you haven't had a second turn.
I'm just going to back up what other people have been saying. Since the community service can be the result of this, it's making sense to me. I am very concerned about people getting run over in the street. And, this is one way to find out what the public feels, is by having them come to a public hearing. And, if it's mixed up and we don't know where we want to go, then we'll have another work session. So I'm good with option A.
All right, Alan and then Mike.
Yeah, I was going to say that I don't recall community service being in any of our ordinances. I know that was the discretion of the judge, so I don't think we needed to do that. As far as the work session is concerned, I'm interested in moving this along, especially since it's a public safety issue, and And option B would actually delay this for months. And option A actually has a work session built into it. We have a public hearing and then a work session, and then we take action. And if we don't want to take action, we can have another work session. So the work session's already built into this. Unless we do something radically different to change this, we can do minor tweaks to it, and maybe the city attorney can put guardrails around that for us. But we can choose to move forward once we have the information from the public hearing and the ordinance set in place. But anything to add to that, city attorney?
No, you nailed it.
Okay, Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the comments of my colleagues on multiple levels. To my colleague, Councilor Ye, I would say that I think it was before you were on council. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. But it was before a couple of folks were on council. I think Randy and Matt certainly. I brought a motion for an ordinance that was supported by many police officers that I spoke with to mirror Springfield's ordinance 6.111 that makes it a violation to cite if you're handing something out of your car to someone standing in the roadway, because that's a danger. And that issue was voted down at the council table. I'm hopeful that maybe we can reconsider that decision at some point soon. But I would say I appreciate Sarah's comments very much, and to Catherine's comments. The judge always has a lesser discretion when it comes to this sort of thing. But I will remind my colleagues, in reference to Randy's point about what the judge can and can't do. The judge works for us, and on 2 different occasions, I have asked him specific questions. And one of those was, okay, like Randy said, we make the camp, and the folks from 13th are invited to go there, and they don't want to go there. And we're not doing anything to compel them to go there, which is why I voted against it. And so they end up on side of the street causing a hazard. I think that I'd be more interested in a further discussion with the judge, who could say something like, for example, suspend, the sentence of them having to spend X number of days in jail if they will do the community service, and the judge can issue the demand that they seek drug treatment. The judge has that discretion if he wants to. I think a further discussion with Judge Gill about the way to do this is important. And or the judge saying, if you haven't a place to be, we've created one here, and we would like you to please agree to go and live there in a managed camp as a condition of release. Those are issues that are discussions with the judge about how he does his work. Lastly, I would say, Claire, I appreciate your comments, and I understand entirely, and I appreciate your making that clear as well to Matt, except for the part about how I live east of Belly River. But thank you very much.
North, Counselor. Never eat shredded wheat. I believe I said north.
Right. Thank you.
All right, Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I appreciate Councilor Clark's comments. I'm more supportive of option A when we go to the motion phase, simply because I think that we need to have more discussion about this. It needs to be more in depth, and we need to look at some other options and solutions out there. What Councilor Clark is suggesting is I think very proactive. It's very good, but it's going to cost money, and the money that we don't have, and money that should be provided for through the social service system. If we're going to ask, or we're going to tell people, okay, we're not going to put you in jail, we're not going to fine you, we want you to do this community service. A, somebody's got to administer the program. B, somebody has to supervise what these people do. And C, there has to be reporting mechanisms that bring that back to the judge in order for that to work. And we need to be able to, again, work collaboratively with our partners across the county to affect that kind of change. So I think we need to have a deeper discussion, and maybe this is a point of not just having a city council work session, but a joint work session with the county and the county commissioners about how we approach this, because I don't think that all of us sitting here as a council can solve this alone, or we won't solve it. I know that that's not going to happen, but we all can't address this effectively alone unless we do it together with the people who have the resources on the other end of this.
Okay, Matt, and then Claire, and then I think we're ready to wrap this up.
Thanks, Mayor. I hope to be brief, and I want to appreciate the city attorney and the city manager weighing in and adding some clarification in regards to the latitude that Judge Gill has. I would love to hear from the judge. And so I still long for that option B, because what we're about to do is codify jail time or increase a penalty after a public hearing phase. And I appreciate the comment that there's already a tool in the judicial toolbox, but I was trying to look up Eugene City Code on my antiquated iPhone and trying to look up EC 4.990. I couldn't pull it up. So I don't know if that community service piece is codified. So it's not, is what I'm seeing. So, I would hope that it could or should be, because we send a message. We send a message to our judicial partners that and law enforcement that there is a binary. The penalties are steep, 10 days in jail or a $500 fine. Well, then let's add a steep community service aspect to that by codifying it. So not just hoping that the bench will do the right thing, which they have been and hopefully will continue to do so, but it's important for this legislative body, in my opinion, to codify it appropriately. I won't be supporting option A. I would be supporting option B. And if option A advances, I would hope that we would have a work session to explore alternative options. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Claire, one final word.
Yeah, thanks. Just in relation to what Councillor Keating was saying, so the city attorney is telling us it is not necessary to codify the community court option, that the judge has that discretion. Now, I understand Councillor Keating is saying, if our code doesn't articulate that, then we're broadcasting a message. But if we codified community service in this one place, then we might be setting ourselves up to have to go back and change all of our code that deals with violations or possible jail time. So that'd be a big implications. In terms of what Councillor Clark was speaking to, I mentioned community court. Now that is voluntary for people to participate in that. And that's part of what makes it work, apparently, from my understanding. I do find some real intrigue in the idea of a release, conditional release from jail, conditional upon going to live at a certain location, because my understanding is in the past, there was conditional release from Lane County Jail to go to the mission before the mission changed to the programming they have now. So that was part of jail release for many, many people for many, many years. So I do think that's an idea to explore further in terms of the legality, the practicality of that. And then I agree with Councillor Evans that we would need to work in conjunction with our partners on the behavioral health and drug and alcohol counseling aspects of anything that we tried to do along those lines. And I see Councillor Zelenka has his hand up, so I will refrain from making a motion, which is what I was going to do. So
Yeah, thanks. Hold on, and we'll let Alan speak, and then I'll turn back to you in a minute.
Yeah, I was going to respond to Councilor Keating's request to do that. There are probably dozens and dozens of places in the code where we would have to go probably back to make our code consistent, and to really no effect, except to have a lot of process and time, when the judge already has this and has had, and nobody's attempting to take it away, this kind of discretionary power. And so that's a process question. But on the other hand, we do not necessarily tell the judge how to do his job. We appoint the judge to make those decisions. And I remember once when we wanted to have a parking violation be 5 times what normal was, and the judge said, and I think we put that in ordinance, and the judge said, "I'm not doing that. That's crazy. That's unjust," and said only 2. So the judge has a lot of discretion and should have a lot of discretion in the way that we have this system set up. And I try to stay away from telling the judge how to do his job. That's why we appointed him in the first place. If we don't like the way he's doing the job, we can yank him out of that position and appoint somebody else. But for that reason, I would suggest that we vote for option A.
Okay, thank you all. Before I turn to Claire to put this on the table, I just want to make a couple of general comments about this discussion, which has been good and also painful. And just to take it back to the beginning, to earlier framing of who is in violation. And our conversation has been that this has all been about people who are unsheltered and who are putting their possessions or living in this common space. But it is also contractors, and it is also businesses trying to prevent people from living in the space. So I think what we're seeing is a sort of a spiraling, potentially out of control, as people try to claim or control that public space. And this is a way of sort of pulling that back. So it feels to me fairly urgent, and I appreciate the interest in moving forward to a public hearing. The second thing that I'm hearing from all of you is what happens next, right? What is that what in addition to sort of making these places safe, what is it that we are wanting to see happen with particularly people who are unsheltered, who are using this space? We're assuming the business people will move their space, or they'll pay a fine. They're probably not going to go to jail. So we're looking at what is that next step, and how do we make that be a step towards some reasonable resolution, as opposed to just 10 days in jail that produces no change in behavior and nothing, it doesn't in the long term create a safer landscape. So that is that bigger question, and I really appreciate the extent to which you're all trying to grapple with that. This is the first step. That would be a subsequent step, but it seems to me we can act on this step and then have that, which is part of our continuing conversation about how do we gradually take what has become a chronic condition of people living unsheltered and all of the implications that has for their lives and for the rest of the community, and how do we begin to turn the corner so that we're responding to that in a more constructive way to resolve it. So thank you for digging into this conversation. And with that, I will turn it over to Claire to put a motion on the table.
Thank you. I move to direct the city manager to set a public hearing to consider an ordinance amending EC 4.990 penalties to add the penalty of a $500 fine or up to 10 days in jail, or both, for a willful violation of EC 4.830, which prohibits unauthorized persons from making non-vehicular use of the portion of the street between the curb that is reserved for vehicles.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Opposed? 1, and that passes 7-1. Thank you all, very constructive. Thank you, staff, for bringing this proposal forward. And with that, you've earned an extra 4 minutes in your break, and I will see, we are adjourned, and I'll see you back here at 7:30. Thank you all.